Hey now, RotoGrinders, welcome to episode 9 of Stonk Watch, the final episode where we will examine the best ball fantasy football marketplace in the context of ADP and investing. Joining me to do that is Kyle Murray. I myself am Chris Gimino. Kyle, what's going on? Are you ready to get down and do some closing bell activities and sort of recap where we've been, see what we're going to do here in the final weeks, and really get our teams finished up nicely?
Yeah, absolutely. There's still plenty of time to make up for drafts if you've missed out. And obviously, there's a lot of news coming in, a lot of information coming in with training camp and preseason. So, a lot of moving pieces. So there's still plenty to discuss and to break down. So I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, just in the first episode, Kyle, we talked about a couple of principles for drafting in best ball that I just want to recap real quick before we start this. Now, we started this talking about focusing on upsides and trying to create super team, which really just changes the way that we think about players. Like there might be players like in a redraft league that you wouldn't necessarily be excited about because they're not starting right away. In best ball, necessarily you're looking at what could happen for that player and focusing on the upside, not just in their ability to actually get on the field, but how much they can do when they are on the field. And that would be go right in hand with principle number 2, which would be embracing volatility and being greedy when others are fearful. We'll talk about that a little bit today. I have certainly been greedy where others are fearful in the last couple of weeks. We're looking for value investments when players fall out of line with their market price. So that is pretty simple. If you see a guy who's dropped significantly past ADP, you may consider scrapping whatever stupid plan you had and drafting the player that's way out of line and get some value for yourself in your draft. Be flexible as you move through your draft. And then the final simple principle to remember is that if you're making a lot of teams like I am, you may want to diversify and hedge your selections across all the rounds of the draft, across your portfolio of teams, and not be like some of these idiots on Twitter I see posting just ginormous exposure percentages on their players like they know what's going to happen. Kyle, do you have anything to say about those principles?
No, I think, it is when you kind of think back to the first episode that we did and kind of like, the eagle view, like from, 50 feet up, it's been pretty cool to see kind of guys we were on and where their ADP would move and kind of how we would approach some of the news and which way it broke and stuff like that. So it's definitely been cool to see that. So I think that doing the show was, I think a beneficial thing for both of us and hopefully for the listeners and the viewers as well. But I think it'll be fun, especially now to recap, especially where some of these ADP differences have kind of fallen. And then I'd love to hear more about some of these spots where you were greedy. I know I was hearing them in Slack, but I definitely think it'll be fun to break those down as well.
Yeah, it's gonna make me look stupid today, Kyle, because this is where I get to really show my cards of what I've been up to in best ball this summer. And some of the takes are not so popular. Some of them are pretty popular. So we'll see how that pans out here as the course of the show goes on. Let's talk about the early round draft movers. That's where we're going to start our show. So throughout the course of the summer, on the left-hand side of your screen, you have got the early round players who have moved up. On the right-hand side of the screen, the early round players who have moved down. And if you are not watching on the screen, you can head over to RotoGrinders YouTube. Check us out over there and Kyle's beautiful face, and like and subscribe, of course, if you indeed like what we're doing. And if you don't like, do it anyway because it helps us. Okay, let's talk about the biggest difference that we see on the left-hand side here, Rashee Rice. We've talked about him a number of times this summer. We'll get into some more players that we want to buy and sell. But when we talk about a move like this, 2 full rounds, give me your take on this. Are you able to continue buying someone who has moved 2 full rounds up from where their price was just a month ago?
Honestly, I think in certain situations it's difficult, but for Rashee Rice, I don't think so. Just because of the fact that we are so high on him, and like it's a spot where we still just think that there is inherent risk that others are perceiving that we just aren't really seeing at this point. Like it seems like the suspension is just like an afterthought, and if there is one, it would probably end up only being 1 or 2 games. So for Rice, like he's a guy who we are projecting as a very clear wide receiver 2 with wide receiver 1 upside. So a top, you know, 20 guy easily at the position. So especially in an elite offense with such good stacking capabilities on Underdog and DraftKings for best ball. So I still think you can continue to buy on Rice. And it's really cool to see him be here now after we've been hyping him up all offseason when you think that he was actually in the 80s at one point in June. So that's even, even better to think about there. But yeah, so I'd still think you can definitely buy on Rashee Rice here.
Yeah, some pretty good closing line value for sure happening
Yeah.
there on Rice if you got in on that a little bit early. So, who else are you buying? Give me another name, right? It doesn't have to be on the upside of things. It could be on someone on the downside of list. Where are you looking at this market and saying, you know what? I see what the market's doing. I'm either going to go with the wind or against the wind, and I'm going to buy. Who are you buying?
Yeah, there's a lot of names here that I really like. Obviously, Cooper Cup, Isaiah Pacheco have been two guys I've just been banging the drum for, so I'm not going to stop buying there. Even with Pacheco up to 32, we've been, rising Cup up in our rankings very aggressively recently, and I have no problem with that. So those are two guys, but a couple other names that I still really like on the downside as well. Brandon Ayuk, he's going to continue to fall, and I'm going to continue to buy because I'm just simply not worried, and maybe I should be. I don't know, but like again, like you've said this line a couple times over the past few episodes where money talks, and I agree 100%. I think a deal will get done with IU. He'll be on the field. I think if things go completely sideways and he's not on the field for the 49ers, I still think he'd be a guy who can provide some value at this ADP. So Ayuk is definitely on the list of guys that I'm still buying. And then Hollywood Brown as well. It's kind of odd to see his numbers shoot so far up, but there's a chance that he still plays week one. And if he doesn't play week one, it's probably going to be a 1 or 2 week injury at most. So a guy with this kind of upside that we've loved all offseason, I'm not going to change my tune on that just because there's a chance he could miss the first game.
Pretty much right before the injury, I was getting greedy on him when he was in round 5. Right. And the reason that I was getting greedy on him was because I really love the Chiefs offense. And I don't think it's not even a remotely hot take that the Chiefs offense looks pretty good right now. But I was thinking about, okay, later in the season, in the playoff weeks, if I am looking for someone who could possibly get me a spike week, Marquise Brown is certainly someone that can get you there on the cheap. Now, those matchups aren't the best for spike week. So even within the season, I still think that getting a piece of the Chiefs offense for a significant discount is a good idea. So I've been greedy where others are a little bit fearful here on Brown, particularly since it's an upper body injury and not a lower body injury. I think they would be more concerned if it was something down below the waist that was injured on Brown. Uh, I also want to mention Cooper Cup. I've been willing to draft him wherever, right, so far, and he's one of my higher owned wide receivers. Do you have any Cooper Cup takes? I mean, am I going to be kicking myself for continuing to buy as his price gets into the second round?
I mean, just throwing back to my quotes on it probably even a month or so ago. Like, I was pretty adamant that we might be just simply wrong on Cooper Cup or as an ADP or as a drafting community because I think that he should have been ranked where Puka Nakua was. And obviously it took a Puka Nakua injury scare in training camp for that ADP to rise, but it sort of did catch up a little bit there. So I totally agree. I think Cooper Cup can be drafted inside the top 20. I think he definitely has top 10 wide receiver upside. Um, Obviously there is some risk there with the age. And he's a guy that we'll talk about later as one of my final thoughts players. But I still think the upside is massive for Cooper Cup. Keep in mind, he's only 2 years removed from nearly 2,000 yards.
All right, what about players that we think we should be selling in this range of the draft, right? So we see what the ADP has done here. We don't like it quite as much, or we see the field going down on them and we want to go down right with them. You got a player here that you're selling at the top end of the draft.
Yeah, the first one that really stands out is Xavier Worthy, and it's mainly due to him. It's not necessarily where I am completely out on Xavier Worthy. It's just I would rather buy up other options at on that team, right? I like Pacheco more. I even think that stacking Pacheco with Mahomes is fine. I like Marquise Brown with his price dropping. I like Rashee Rice more. Travis Kelsey is still in the equation, and that's been the argument for Worthy the entire offseason, right? So that's sort of where I'm at with Worthy. George Pickens is a guy who's falling, and I'm happy to just kind of let him fall past me. Same thing with Christian Kirk. I mean, you don't want to take too much from the preseason because keep in mind it doesn't really necessarily matter a whole lot. Teams are trying different things, whatever. But Steelers have by far been the most putrid looking offense I've ever seen, and it's no real surprise. It's that's that Arthur Smith fairy dust right there. You put some Arthur Smith fairy dust on it, and all of a sudden all you can do is punt and turn the ball over on downs. But so happy to see Pickens fall, and I'll just let him keep falling past me in drafts. But I would say Pickens, Worthy, and Christian Kirk would be the three that I'm happy to keep selling on.
Yeah, Christian Kirk does have a little bit of an injury right now. I'm not necessarily sure I'm selling on Christian Kirk, but I was buying pretty aggressively early in the summer, and I've put the brakes on that quite a bit. I'm glad you mentioned Xavier Worthy first, so I don't have to look like an idiot when he goes completely bananas like he did in the preseason. But here's the general thesis on Worthy that, from my perspective, is that our opponents are all busy paying this price tag for him. And he's a phenomenal fit in the offense. And I think if everything has a range, and I definitely have some Xavier Worthy teams, but I'm just not going over the field on Worthy like we've seen some people doing out there on Twitter. I think Davis Mack has like a ton of them. But at the end of the day, like I'm just going to see if I can wait till a future NFL season to try to capitalize on what I think Worthy can be as a player. And hopefully he just has some sort of a mediocre showing in his rookie campaign. He is very small. He may not be a 100% snap kind of a player. So it's pretty easy for me to envision him just not being the world record destroyer that everyone seems to think when they see him down. Quite frankly, I get it though. Like I'm not trying to say like I don't see how it could go right for him, but I just don't think enough people are thinking about how it can go wrong. All right, let's talk about the middle rounds. After I made an idiot of myself fading Xavier Worthy, let's get into who are we liking to buy who have moved here in the middle rounds. There are certainly some really big movers here. Some guys who have jumped up from the lower ranks. Some guys who have just climbed a little bit more steadily. But give me someone that you're seeing here in the middle round that you really want to start buying on uh, for one reason or another.
Yeah, there's a couple names that really stand out as guys who have moved a lot that I want to buy on. First being Chase Brown. His ADP's up to 100, but that's kind of where I was drafting him at times before, just because he's a guy I want to be aggressive on and make sure I'm not missing out on him. Again, he's been a guy we've been banging the drum on for 2 months now, 3 months now, since we kind of rolled out this best ball product, and I will continue to do so. He's, now that season long drafts rolling around, he is a guy that I'm just not leaving drafts without. If I have to reach on him, I will. He's a guy that I absolutely love here. I don't think Zach Moss is a guy that's going to, threaten too much here at the grand scheme of things at the end of the year when it comes down to who is the RB1 in this offense. And this is an offense that I really want to target. So Chase Brown is definitely one of my guys. DeAndre Hopkins, this number has fallen quite a bit here. He's down to 90. And it sounds like he's going to actually play week one or expect to play. He's a guy who's been, toughing through injuries his entire career. So it's not too much of a surprise there, but we bumped his projection down a little bit because it sounded like he was going to likely miss the first game. But now it's sounding like he's going to be good to go for week one. So I think this is a spot where his ADP is dropping because of that injury, and I will gladly buy that up. And I don't think people are really fully catching on or maybe fully sold on him being back for week one. But even again, same thing with Hollywood. Even if he misses one game, I'm totally fine there. Khalil Shakir, his ADP's gone up a little bit there with some of the injuries. MVS, not necessarily a huge headliner there with injury, but Curtis Samuel dealing with turf toe. It sounds like he could be back for week one as well, but turf toe, we've seen, as a Detroit Lions fan, I hear turf toe and I instantly think of Javid Best, who was like one of the most electric college players of all time. He comes to the Lions, gets turf toe, and has to retire because of it. Like, I'm not saying this is what it's going to be for Curtis Samuel, but this is sort of the injury that can nag on an entire year. So, not that you need that to like Khalil Shakir, but certainly doesn't hurt. So, Shakir is going to be another guy that I like a lot.
That's weird. You mentioned Javid Best. I almost busted into Slack like the Kool-Aid Man when Worthy caught that touchdown in preseason and just like started to make a comp between when Javid Best returned a kickoff in preseason for a touchdown and then was like basically never heard from again in fantasy. But yeah, good callback to Javid Best, and ultimately love all those players that you were just talking about. I don't think you mentioned Jaden Daniels. Like Kyle, when do we see someone who's got the rare combo of elite rushing and elite passing going in the 10th round or like the 9th round? Like you just don't, you're never going to see it again. This is the last time you're getting him here. You better draft him now. So I've been going out of my way sometimes. I actually haven't gotten him enough. I'm only at like 10%. I do want to get more, but I do think he's a fantastic upside fantasy pick here in the 2024 season. Okay, what about players that you might be selling in the middle rounds? So these are players, again, either with the wind or against the wind, you think you're going to be going underweight the field on in your exposures.
Yeah, Curtis Samuel is falling, and I'm sort of happy to be a part of that group. Again, like I don't want to necessarily write him off because of this injury, but I am definitely concerned with that. And again, simply I would rather have Khalil Shakir. I would rather draft Keon Coleman for his upside. If I'm stacking the Bills, Dalton Kincaid would be a preferred option before Curtis Samuel. So Samuel was a guy that I was sort of starting to sell myself on, and then this injury news came. So now he's going to be a guy that we'll definitely continue to let him fall. Jahan Dotson obviously traded, so his ADP will probably continue to fall. Moved him down in the rankings a ton yesterday. Wide receiver 3 role in Philly just simply isn't an attractive role. We were talking about guys like Johnny Wilson and Paris Campbell in that role earlier, but he's probably going to be the guy who has that role. It just more so comes down to the fact that I just don't think he's going to earn a lot of targets. I actually think this helps Devonta Smith. I guess it's a little bit of a trade reaction. Jahan Dotson could play on the outside, allows Smith to come back on the inside. So Dotson's definitely a guy that I'm willing to continue to let kind of fall by the wayside. And then Ezekiel Elliott, I will see Ezekiel Elliott probably never. Rico Dowdle is my guy in Dallas. He's the guy that I would want for even with his ADP moving up. Ezekiel Elliott, I just don't think there's a ton of upside there. Me and you have had a couple of good laughs, maybe harshly at him running through the gauntlet there and not being able to make through. That did not look good. That did not look good at all.
It's not like say like having like a back issue isn't like the most sexually appealing thing. I would say that like having running through the gauntlet and being on your knees practically in pain doesn't like give you a lot of confidence that this guy is young, vibrant, running back out there ready to smash yet again. So yeah, I'm not so much in on Zeke Elliott. I've been pretty much fading him since like maybe the first couple of drafts where I might have accidentally clicked it. Not very much since. Now, a couple of other guys, Jonathan Brooks. Look, I think this is another situation where like the best ball method that I see a lot of people an approach taking is, look, he's not going to be there for you in the beginning of the season, but his talent profile is huge. Not, at the end of the year, he could be someone that could end up, absolutely taking over and taking control. And I think that's people looking at the bright side, but I think you also have to look at the potential downside of someone coming off an injury like this is, well, what if he comes back and he's not any good or doesn't get a lot of playing time or just never comes back? I mean, he probably is coming back, right? But like, and all those signs point to him being a good and talented player. But I just think that there are other players in the price range that you can get a similar result from for that kind of a price. And I would just rather take someone that I feel more confident about their health. Understanding, of course, the talent profile for him could be someone that could be significantly rounds higher in future years. So I, once again, do get why people are taking him. Just something I've been a little bit underweight on. And Jerome Ford, Kyle, he was not good last year, right? Like, and he had pretty much the same opportunity. And now we're going to be looking at, once again, Nick Chubb taking a portion of his opportunity for some portion of the year, right? And then there are some other backs, maybe not good backs in the mix here, but like, why should I be excited about Jeremy Ford in the playoffs? I mean, he's like a regular season pick, right?
Yeah, I think he's much better for like season long, where you can actually start him and you might need someone through the first. I mean, Nick Chubb can miss the first month and a half of the season. He could be good there, but Ford, a guy you don't necessarily want to spend a ton of draft capital on for a guy who's going to get worse as the season goes on with Nick Chubb likely returning at some point. I mean, I guess there's a chance that maybe Chubb doesn't come back this year, so that's like the upside for Ford. But Ford is also a receiving back, right? That's kind of where he's going to, get his bread and butter. And on a half point PPR, so like Underdog, there's, it's another, strike towards his value. So Jerome Ford, I actually don't mind for season long, but for best ball, I'm not necessarily loving.
Yeah, same there. Okay, let's get into the late rounds. The late rounds of the draft are the most fun rounds for me these days. I look back at some of my early season late round selections, Kyle. I wanted to hide. I was like embarrassed by some of the picks I was taking earlier in the summer, but now I feel strong. I feel like flexing on people with my confidence level in a certain number of these picks. So, who are you liking past pick 160?
Yeah, I mean, he's probably not a guy that I feel the need to buy a ton right now, just because I have so much of him already. But Jalen Tolbert, that ADP, that's like chef's kiss right there, up to 167. He was a guy who, for a while, I was worried that we weren't going to get any closing line value on because it was stagnant for so long. I remember we had a conversation like, why isn't this moving? But luckily, I think people are starting to see it, and it might be due to the CeeDee Lamb holdout. Maybe that's why the ADP is coming up, but I'm not too concerned about that. Like, that's not why I was interested in Jalen Tolbert. But in terms of guys who I'm still happy to buy here, Yoshi Voss at 189. Again, another guy whose ADP has gone up with a mix of him seemingly being the wide receiver 3, as well as maybe a little bit of the Jamar Chase holdout, but I doubt that's a huge indicator there for the ADP going up. But Yoshi Boss is a guy who can be on the field quite a bit. He's a talent that we like. So happy to continue to buy him. Vidal has been a guy that we've played sort of ping pong with in terms of liking and not liking. And is he going to make the team? Like, it's been a kind of a weird whirlwind of a situation for Vidal, who was injured early on in the preseason games as well. But in the games that he did play, he ended up looking pretty good. So Vidal, I think, is a guy who I'm still happy to buy on. Bo Nix as well. I saw our very own Brett Devine had a touchdown prop in there for Bo Nix and scores and odds, and I like that. I think he's a guy who's going to have a lot of rushing upside, maybe not necessarily yardage wise, but I think he can be a guy who can punch in a handful of touchdowns on the ground there. So Bo Nix is a guy who I'm also happy to continue to buy, and I know you were potentially on him earlier than a lot of people were as like a late round pick as kind of a punt QB option. So good call out there.
Yeah, and so and again, we were talking about Stidham as recently as the last episode, right? Being someone we didn't know for sure whether Stidham was going to start the year, but we always knew Nix was coming in. So that's a situation where I think it's starting to, not only does it look cheap, but also he actually kind of looks good. So, and it looks like a great fit for what Sean Payton's doing offensively as well, which I think is another plus. It's not just him being a good and talented player, but I think there's actually a bit of a scheme fit here, just with the way that he releases the ball so quickly. Okay, let's get in to somebody that I like, who is tall. Braylon. Well, actually, I don't know how tall is he. He looks huge to me.
He's big.
Braylon Allen over in New York is looking awesome in camp and in the preseason games, and that was something we were talking about this as far back as in the college football Slack last year, right? We were really excited about what Braylon Allen can do. And then he gets drafted and no one's drafted. He's in the 200s for like half the summer. And I'm just sitting there clicking the button all like, this guy's good, right? And then you think about, who he's behind. He's behind Breece Hall. It was a serious injury in recent memory. So I thought, of course, he's probably going to be able to pick up enough role to be worth a 200 draft pick. And then, of course, if Breece Hall gets hurt, watch out. I mean, this guy could break. He could break it. And I really like that this price is moving up. And I'm still drafting him at 160. I'll take it. I think that's pretty comparable to what you're getting at that point in the draft. So I'm, it's more fair now, but I do love myself some Braylon Allen. And I do want to mention my guy, highest owned player, unfortunately my highest owned player, but sometimes I find a take and I'm going to go with it. It's Andre Yoshivas. I've talked about it a couple of times on this show over the summer. I think a lot of people think that because he's an Ivy League guy and somebody who hadn't necessarily shown the prospect pedigree to be some sort of an outlier, they won't really believe that that's what he can be. But I would say for the price tag, relative to the price tag is a key thing to mention there, Kyle. But you're paying very low prices for him. And he's in a Bengals offense that could be extremely explosive. And from what I am seeing, both what they talked about him last summer and how much they loved him then, to him surviving and getting through that mostly Burrow-less season last year without fading away, and then coming back to camp this summer and basically winning that job in the slot, which is a place that people didn't think he could play. If he ends up holding that for the course of this season, he is going to absolutely destroy this price tag. I mean, and that's not to mention the fact that he can play outside too. And if one of these other guys get hurt, he could be there. I've heard that same argument for Jermaine Burton, and I believe it. And you know what? I could be wrong. It could be Burton that ends up being the guy that would be the benefit of any kind of injury or some sort of upside situation. But for me, I'm taking the guy that has been proving it since he walked in the door here that they like him. And now Joe Burrow likes him. Give me Yoshivas, baby. I want all the Yoshivas. All right. What about guys you're fading?
Yeah. So I guess this is a time to sort of put our hands on our faces and kind of eat some of the crow there. We've had a lot of good closing line value, but Troy Franklin right there. That was a guy that I was pretty high on at one point, and that looks like he's like wide receiver 8 on the Broncos right now. I think he'll still make the team, but that was a tough one. So I don't even think you can consider him a sell because I'm pretty sure he's just not getting drafted in a lot of drafts right now. But he's definitely a guy that I'm willing to sell. One guy that I kind of missed out on in the buy, which I don't mind talking about, again, just one of those trade reaction thing. Luke McCaffrey, I think, could potentially be the biggest upside play for Washington now with Jahan Dotson gone, but it's just a little bit of a callback there. But Troy Franklin's a sell for me. Quentin Johnston, I'm not buying any of this social media stuff where he can catch the ball again. I'm just not going to do it. So happy to continue to sell on him there. No issues with him. Just not having any exposure to him at all. And then Deshaun Watson's another guy as well. Yeah, I don't think he's on the list here, but he's definitely a guy who I'm going to continue to sell. Oh yeah, there he is on the up. But Watson, just again, there's other quarterbacks I like more, and other stacks I think are just easier to gravitate to, especially late round stacks. But you could do worse than Watson, I guess, at ADP, but with his ADP going up, don't have a ton of appeal there.
What do you people think is going to happen with Greg Dortch? That's what I want to know. Like, what are we thinking here with Greg Dortch? Like, what's the ceiling on Greg Dortch, right? Like, if someone gets hurt, is anything change for Greg Dortch? Like, if you want 7 fantasy points or whatever, I mean, I think that's a great path. He's not going to get you a 0. I don't know. I'm not seeing the Greg Dortch upside. I like him. Like, I think he's a decent player, but I think for best ball, I think you might be pulling the trigger in the wrong spot for him. But we'll see. I could be wrong. Maybe on DraftKings, you might be able to get some value there, but certainly on Underdog, I'm not so much liking the Greg Dortch stuff out there. All right, Kyle, this is the end of Stonk Watch. Maybe ever, but certainly for this season. So I need you to plant your flag. Players that you really like, players that you really don't like, players that you're afraid of, and players that you're thinking could have some asymmetric upside. Those are the rules. We'll start with your flag plant at high exposure. Who's the player that you're basically looking at your exposure and you're saying, you know what, that's my guy this year?
Yeah, right now it's Chase Brown. He's a guy whose ADP has gone up, and he's a guy I have a ton of. Jalen Tolbert was also in consideration. I have a lot of Jalen Tolbert, but he's more of a late round pick. Chase Brown's kind of climbed his way up a little bit, but yeah, Chase Brown right now is the guy for the high exposure. So fingers crossed on him winning that RB1 rule in Cincinnati.
My guy is Tyjae Spears of the Tennessee Titans. He is fantastic for roster construction, particularly if you're holding off on the running backs early, coming from an ambiguous backfield with a talent profile to explode whether or not anything happens with his usage. He could obviously be so good that he wins additional usage over Pollard. More likely, the situation would be where something happens to Pollard, where he could be an absolute league winner. As it stands, for the price tag, he could probably get it done with no change in status. So I do love that combination for Tyjae Spears, especially for the roster construction elements it provides me. Now let's talk about players that you have low exposure on that you don't plan on changing as these weeks close out.
Yeah, the one that stands out to me the most is Michael Pittman. In terms of the Colts passing attack and stacking them, the guy that I was preferring was Josh Downs and Adonai Mitchell. I see maybe a facial expression on Michael Pittman. Is that true?
They did not look good last night.
No, they did not. The first drive looked good. And then after that, I don't know. Against the third string Cincinnati Bengals, I definitely did not get exciting vibes from Anthony Richardson there. And who knows? Maybe they turn their brains off after drive 1. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they just called it in after a good first drive, because after the first drive, Richardson was 6 for 7 and a touchdown, right? So that's a decent drive. After that, he didn't know where any of the pass rush was coming from. He didn't find any sort of open receivers. He airmailed a couple of tight ends on underneath routes. It was bad, and obviously threw a pick 6 as well. So Pittman, yeah, I'm not necessarily feeling bad about fading him right now. Down, know what it is? Maybe they need Josh Downs in the offense to be able to fully operate. So yeah, I'm fine with Michael Pittman, and quite honestly, I'm maybe thinking of maybe we should move Anthony Richardson down in the rankings, but I don't want to overreact.
Yeah, I'm not going to overreact. I think it was a bad game, and I'm not as harshly against Pittman as you are, but I do understand it. It is, if you're drafting Anthony Richardson, you're not necessarily thinking he's getting there with his passing ability anyway. Yeah. You're hoping for a lot of rushing touchdowns and a lot of rushing yardage. So Pittman, he's not necessarily as beautiful a correlation with the quarterback as some other players out there in the draft. A player that I am taking a stand on to the downside with another quarterback who looks quite the opposite of Anthony Richardson last night, Caleb Williams. However, his running back, DeAndre Swift, has a number of reasons that I am disinterested in drafts. The first being the fact that there is significant downside via a couple of players behind him on the roster, assuming they all stay on the roster. Khalil Herbert and Roshan Johnson are both players that I think are pretty good, and that could take away some of his value if he ends up stinking like he has in the past. And that's the next point, is that he has a history of not meeting the moment near the goal line in a number of other ways. He's been touted as a good pass catching back, and I think that could be something useful for the Bears offense. But ultimately, there are a lot of similar options in the price range. He may not be the goal line back at all times, especially with Caleb Williams being potentially the goal line back at certain times. And I'm not taking DeAndre Swift at cost. All right, let's talk about a player who has got an anti-fragile profile with asymmetric upside that you are loving in drafts this year, Kyle. Who's the guy that could break it for you?
Yeah. So in terms of, maybe this might be too early of a pick here, but Isaiah Pacheco, again, like, I just don't see a ton of, variance in his projection. Like the role seems extremely safe, and obviously the upside, along with efficiency and touches going up, is just massive. So I think in terms of that description, Isaiah Pacheco fits the bill. He's a guy who last year in the playoffs was averaging over 22 touches a game. And I think that that's kind of how they're going to want to use him this season as well. Obviously, the Chiefs are going to throw the ball a ton, but you also have to kind of assume what I've been calling the trickle-down effect, right? Where this elite offense is going to just trickle down to everyone, right? From a passing perspective, it's going to involve Pacheco in the passing game. It's going to allow Pacheco to get some goal line opportunities, some more as well. So I just think sky is the limit for Pacheco. I don't necessarily know if he's one of those guys who has like RB1 overall upside, but he definitely has a top 5 RB upside profile for sure. I think a lot of that comes with it's just a really safe pick in my opinion, because obviously if he stays healthy, the volume should be massive and the efficiency should be really good, and especially playing in that elite offense.
Yeah, definitely a good call there. I think I'm going to name one that I think we both agree with. Take the analysis from Braylon Allen and apply it to Blake Corum directly, except put him in a bigger role to start with on an offense that we have seen just an enormous amount of upside with Kyron Williams last year when he got the bulk of the work. So that's what you can imagine happening with Corum, who could be a better player than Kyron Williams, to be honest, if that situation were to occur. However, you don't need that situation to occur to get some value out of him. He's a top pedigree player coming from the University of Michigan. He could just turn out to be someone who is so good that he ends up earning the role from Kyron. I don't think anyone's expecting that, and no one's going to predict that outright. But I'm just looking at the range of outcomes here, and I see a guy who's probably just going to be involved. I don't really see them not using him at all this year and having Kyron Williams run out there for as much as they were using him last year. And by the same token, I'm looking at the anti-fragile element of this and saying that the downside is limited and the upside is tremendous. Why am I not drafting Blake Corum? Well, I am drafting him, so I don't have to worry about it. Okay. Last but not least, player that you may be fearful is going to bust your season, Kyle. A player that you have high exposure to, whether you want to still have a high exposure to him or not. Who are you a little bit afraid of how much you own?
Yeah, this is a tough question because I still really like a lot of the guys that I have, high exposure to. And then in terms of the guys I have really high exposure to, it's later picks like Jalen Tolbert, Chase Brown. Like I don't necessarily think those guys would bust my season. So I'm going to go with a guy who I do still really like. I just think the downside for him is quite down. But it's Cooper Kupp. Like, I still think the upside is massive for Cooper Kupp. But I think there are also a lot of outs for him failing, right? There's all health issues. He's 31 years old. He's coming off of a couple of years in a row with injury issues. I haven't really been believing this at all, but there still is the idea that Puka Nacua might be the number 1 wide receiver. Maybe they run the ball more with Kyron Williams, Blake Corum. So there are paths to Cooper Kupp, not necessarily paying off the price. I don't necessarily believe that. I don't think that's the case. I'm still fine with where I have Cooper Kupp, and I still think he's a guy with a ton of upside. However, he's the guy that I am most concerned with potentially, completely busting my season, because I do have a lot of him, and I do think that he is a guy who definitely has some downside here.
Yeah, a lot of the guys that I have, I end up having because I'm not that afraid of them busting my season by taking them out of position, which is how you end up getting a guy more often than your fair share. Is you're basically finding yourself liking him a lot more than the field likes him. So a lot of my guys, not so afraid of. One guy that I am a little bit concerned about because of the way that I was building my teams using him is Rico Dowdle, is because I was feeling confident at a certain point in the summer that I could get away with 4 running back teams and 5 running back teams even, where I was waiting an extremely long time and loading up at the wide receiver position. If Dowdle isn't any good, that could hurt a lot of those teams, and that could really damage my chances to do well across my entire portfolio, because I do have a high percentage of Rico Dowdle. Not so much now that his price has gone up into the 120s, but back when he was 140, I was getting a ton. So yeah, Dowdle's a guy, and not to mention the fact that he's not really a highly touted player. The potential for the Cowboys to find another option to add to the backfield is certainly prevalent, and he just might not be that good to begin with. So Dowdle is certainly somebody that I'm worried about. Kyle, that is going to do it for Stonk Watch in the 2024 season. I wish you best of luck in all of your contests. Head over to RotoGrinders.com. Check out the best ball content we're going to be updating these rankings up until the final bell of the best ball season. I wish you all the best of luck. I'm Chris Gimino. We'll be back again, hopefully, for Stonk Watch.